Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of T2RL Talks, our periodic podcast on issues of interest in the airline, IT and distribution spaces. And today on T2RL Talks, we're going to be discussing the state of play on the introduction of Offer, Order, Settle, Deliver, the new distribution and IT technologies for the airline industry. And to discuss this, I have our two heads of industry practice, Bert Craven, who heads up our industry technology practice, and Ian Luck, who heads the T2RL distribution practice. In setting the scene for progress towards OOSD, I think we have to consider the overall state of the industry, and T2RL is just on the point of publishing our final numbers for 2023, which show that the industry generally has recovered well from pandemic days, but that recovery is perhaps a little patchy and some regions are doing better than others. Do you think there's anything more to read in that? I know that some people are talking about a full recovery having been made. I'm a little skeptical about that. I think we've still got some way to go.
Yeah, I think we have to be clear what we mean by full recovery. So the industry is obsessed with its peak of its 2019 peak. And the 2023 numbers are within 5% of that, as you said, Ian, patchy. So some people have exceeded their 2019 numbers. Other people are still dragging the global average down a bit. But what we have to bear in mind is that we're missing, 4 or 5 years of growth at an average of 6%. So full recovery is some way off. Recovery to 2019 is within an arm's reach now. So I think that's the sort of the takeaway there for me. I think also what's very gratifying is that the numbers that we're seeing now are within 0.1% of our projection from last year. So in terms of our ability to look forward now and see the rate at which recovery is taking place, we're becoming a lot more certain about that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, and kudos to our research team in Mumbai. Definitely. Who've put together those projections consistently over the last few years. They have got very, very good at it. Ian, do you think that the patchy recovery is influencing the rate at which airlines in different regions are taking up, firstly NDC and then looking further forward to full-blown OOSD?
And I think the last few years has been obviously challenging for airlines. A lot of airlines are now trying to sort of not talk about recovery and pandemic. People are trying to look forward now, I think, although it's almost impossible occasionally not to look back at that data. But people are starting to look forward a lot more. No doubt some airlines lost resources, lost experienced people over the last few years. They had to focus on cost for a period through those times. Some projects got delayed and put on hold, or investment was scrutinized very carefully. So I think some airlines did delay some of what they might have been doing otherwise on NDC and offer order. We do hear some people who said, we used the time where day-to-day business was not happening as normal to really try and do some good thinking and strategy on where we wanted to go. And we see a few airlines coming out with announcements now, and perhaps those are the ones that did use some of that time to really kind of get their strategy clear. But I still see some customers still kind of rebuilding teams, recruitment, trying to get that structure in place. So I think it will have delayed certainly some airlines in the place where they would have wanted to have been by this time.
Yeah, I think it's no coincidence that the recovery seems to have gone maybe fastest in the North American market, certainly in North American domestic. Their airline sales are going gangbusters there. And it's also in North America where we're seeing a lot of news, a lot of reaction to the major airlines' NDC strategies. And obviously, most recently, we've seen the news that Delta is finally getting on the bandwagon and is finally going to implement an NDC strategy. But maybe we can do a sort of compare and contrast of the big three network airlines in the US and their approaches to certainly NDC distribution.
Yes. It's been interesting to see Delta's news. They'd always kind of said that they were going to be there one day, but they didn't sort of see a particular rush. They didn't think the industry was quite ready, perhaps. And they're still saying that this will be quite a kind of careful, measured project for them. They talked very clearly that they're not changing their distribution strategy. But like many airlines, they're saying now that the sort of legacy technology has kind of taken them to the kind of edge of what they can do, how they can retail their products effectively. And so they need to develop a good NDC solution to enable them to distribute all the products they want to get out to market. But it certainly still seems that they're going to do that in quite a careful, measured way, and with a very big focus on servicing. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to sell any product that can't be completely, fully serviced. And they're a very clear message from them.
And I think there's a sense that they've been clear that they don't see any point in them moving any faster than their channels, distributors and resellers can move.
Yes, I think that's right. And it's interesting. Some other airlines would probably say, if we hadn't moved at some point in the past, then some of the channels and resellers wouldn't have got as far as they have. So
I'm sure the other carriers will be saying, yeah, we primed the pump for Delta.
Yes.
Well, there's a definite compare and contrast with the way that American Airlines has approached this. And you might characterize it as the cattle prod approach to getting the travel sellers online.
Yes. I mean, when American made a lot of changes last year and continues to do so, we heard lots of commentary from agencies and others, particularly talking about things like, corporate booking tools not being ready. And, it appears that a number of corporate booking tools have made quite a lot of progress or are investing quite a lot to make progress. And no doubt American would say, and some of the other airlines that have taken a bolder approach would say, the reason some of those people have invested in is because we kind of gave them a strong incentive and need to do so. So you can definitely see both sides. And then we see United somewhere in the middle, probably.
Yeah, I tend to think of United as having taken a Goldilocks approach, and not too strong, not too weak, but making good progress. I find United very interesting because their primary motivation, I think, for moving as they have is to introduce continuous pricing in all of their channels. And they made a very strong statement 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, that said, yes, we're doing continuous pricing, but we guarantee that anything we price using our continuous pricing engine will be no more expensive than our filed fares. So they'll either be the same or they'll be lower.
Sorry, that's what we used to say about dynamic pricing. We used to say, well, if your dynamic prices aren't higher, what you've done is dynamic discounting. So what we're seeing here now is continuous discounting.
Do you think this is a sort of transient thing for United while they kind of nurse the market over the line into using new distribution technologies? Or do you think it's a policy going forward? They're only ever going to discount?
I would say it's transient. I think they're going to want to reassure all of the markets and the channels and the people who distribute their content that this isn't necessarily a sort of a channel shift play in the sense of, these prices will be advantageous to us and to the consumer, but they aren't designed to play one side of the market off against another.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, as we talk about the vision of offer order, we won't have filed fares, so the fares will be the fares. Whatever the price that they offer at the time will be the price. While we're in this hybrid world, which we may be in for some time, trying to give what confidence they can to the market that if you use their modern technology solution, you'll get the best price. And you don't have to always be comparing both the new solution and the old solution. You can use the old solution if you want to. You don't have to use the new solution, but if you use it, it will be as good or better in terms of pricing. And we have seen that approach from other airlines as well. Because I think a lot of agencies and customers they don't fully understand all these changes. It's complex. And so any certainty you can give them, I think, is important.
Looking slightly further afield within North America, I mean, we talk about the big three, but of course, in the modern world, it's really a big four. Southwest come from a different tradition, but they're very definitely one of the big four airlines in the US. Obviously, Southwest predominantly sells directly, so they haven't really been as big a player in the discussions around NDC. But it seems to me that whatever Southwest decides eventually to do in terms of the new distribution technologies is going to have a big influence on the rest of the market.
Yeah, I mean, they've clearly over the last period of time gone into indirect distribution primarily for the business travel market, and focused quite a lot of energy on that, working with GDSs. They have done a little bit of work in the past with the ATP product where there was some API distribution. They've had solutions of their own in the marketplace for corporates. So they've been focused on that side of the travel market. I guess what they ultimately decide about offer order and NDC and things will be important. So I think by PBs, we have Southwest and Ryanair as the biggest two airlines in the world. Often there's sort of those big four US airlines are jockeying for position. They're in the top sort of 5 or 6 globally. So the decisions that any of those 4 big US airlines make is critical, and they bring a lot of PBs to any vendors that they decide to work with.
I think the other thing to consider is obviously, in theory at least, Southwest's business should be simpler than the others because of the type of business they operate, although their network is unusually complex for an LCC. And the other thing is, of course, free changes, which has been part of the Southwest offer for a long time, which means the volume of servicing that goes on in Southwest is very high. So their adoption of any kind of new channels they're going to be looking at servicing very carefully, simply because of the volume of change they have to deal with.
American made quite a big deal a little while ago about how 80% of their bookings are now in what they call modern channels, and that includes both their .com and their NDC channels. But of course, if that's the measure, Southwest have been way ahead of them for a long time. Southwest is 90% direct, maybe a little more than that. So they're very definitely doing a big proportion of their business in modern channels. So as and when they introduce offers and orders on the back end, their channel to market will be probably more straightforward than the other carriers. I'm also interested to note that since we last talked about NDC in particular, that Hawaiian and Sabre seem to have resolved their differences. Hawaiian being one of the very few North American carriers that have gone down the surcharge route on conventional bookings. But it seems like they and Sabre have kissed and made up and always sweetness and light in that market.
We certainly have seen the announcement of a deal between the two parties, and often, once the deal is done, then it does pave the way for a kind of recovery and strength of relationships and working together. So I'm sure both parties are pleased that that's behind them. We do still see, a lot of airlines making changes. The other one in North America with the surcharge is Air Canada. They've been driving NDC adoption. We heard them on a recent IATA podcast saying that they were up to sort of, I think it was mid-teens in NDC adoption, and expecting more growth throughout the rest of this year and beyond. We still see in other parts of the world, significant. Finnair also talks similar to American about high levels of modern adoption. Lufthansa's been there for some time in terms of direct and NDC being the majority of their distribution. Number of carriers in Latin America, Avianca, LATAM, that have made quite bold moves. I think we are seeing significant progress on NDC generally from many, many airlines now. There's still a long tail of medium, smaller airlines that have not launched yet. A lot of them have got plans from what we understand. We see a lot of announcements from the GDSs. We heard Amadeus say recently they had a couple of airline customers that a third of their Amadeus GDS bookings were NDC now compared to EDIFACT.
Yeah, I think at T2RL we've long held that the GDSs will be the key to volume adoption of NDC because of that long tail effect for one thing, and just because of their ability to access the travel sellers across the world, which would take an inordinately long time for all the airlines to have direct connects with all the travel agents. It's just not feasible. You need aggregation at scale, and It doesn't have to be the GDSs, of course. There are other aggregators in the market, but certainly the GDSs do start with an advantage in terms of existing travel seller relationships.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, most people we talk to think that aggregation is the way forward. There will be direct connections between airlines and agencies, either because it's a very significant relationship and it makes sense for both parties, or there are some sort of tech savvy agencies that favor direct connects. But we assume that the majority of travel agency bookings will still come via aggregators because there's a strong service that they offer. Whether the GDSs retain the vast majority of the market share or whether other aggregators can be successful and compete, we hear that some of them are making good progress. That's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, the market is actually more fluid now than it has been for decades, really, as we see the new generation of aggregators. And in fact, some of them, like Travel Fusion, are not that new. They've been around for a couple of decades themselves. But we see them competing very strongly for the travel seller business. I was going to come on to the piece of research that we did around the turn of the year, where we actually talked to a number of large travel sellers to gauge their attitudes towards NDC and what's happening in travel distribution. And I think it's fair to say that our findings show that the travel sellers are maybe more positive than some would have you believe about the new technologies.
Yes, I think that's right. There's obviously lots of different views on NDC. I think when you really get into the conversation with nearly anybody in the industry, generally the view is that travel sellers want to retail as many of the airlines' products as they can. They want to have access to it. They understand that airlines have brought new products to market in their direct channels. Some of them are not easy to get to market in the indirect channel. And so new content is good. More content is good. As much content as possible as options to sell is generally what travel sellers want. The main debate is always about the commercial models, which were there 30 years ago when GDSs started and airlines owned them, and there were debates about, did you sell through your own GDS or somebody else's GDS? There were commercial issues then. Opt-in models, and no doubt there'll be commercial challenges always. That's just part of life, and it's hopefully managed somewhat constructively in the end. And then the other big issue that people debate is the speed of adoption and how ready the industry is. And we talked about Delta and American and others. And some people on the travel seller side are also on different sides of that debate. Some travel sellers say, let's go quickly. There's lots of advantages of doing NDC. Yes, there are some bumps. Yes, not everything worked perfectly on day one, but the pros of going quickly outweigh the cons of delaying. There are others that say, look, a core part of my business, particularly some of the large TMCs, is all about providing very high quality servicing. And I have a global footprint. I operate in 100 markets. I rely on corporate booking tools and other third-party vendors. I cannot go faster than the industry is ready. And we see both sides of that debate as well. But I think you're right, Ian, that overall, we had very strong feedback that nearly all those travel sellers want NDC to succeed and believe it. There is no debate about whether that will happen. It's just the kind of how and how fast.
Yeah. And you're always going to get quite a wide variety of views on this based on the level of engagement that the agency has had. I mean, there are going to be some people who've put a toe in the water and then taken a plunge and are standing there saying, come on in, the water's fine. And then a group of people standing on the side, still mainly speaking from fear and trepidation about what this will do to future economics and what they might have to invest in technology in the short term to catch up. I think, the other thing is that, you may have carriers who are providing a very good NDC experience with full servicing and all of that kind of thing. But if for a particular agency, that one carrier is only 5% of their business, then their overall experience of NDC might be negative, even though individual carrier provisioning is quite good in some places.
Yeah, and there's a customer angle as well. So a lot of some of the TMC say some corporate customers are happy to go forward. They want the best content, and they don't mind some bumps on the servicing side if something's not quite right. Whereas others say no, it's got to be absolutely everything's got to be booked online. The corporate booking tool's got to be ready. Everything's got to be ready. I don't want any workarounds. So there are some agencies that are half in the water and half out, to use your analogy, Bert, and it depends a bit on the customer as well.
One of the threads that came through from the conversations with travel sellers was that the implementation of NDC is still pretty inconsistent, and there are big variations between airline implementations. Even when they're using technology from the same provider, they still manage to find ways of being different, and that is a challenge. And we've got to have some sympathy for the travel sellers' predicament there.
But it also, it talks to one of the points we've made for years, is that even with the same solution from the same vendor, the quality of implementation and integration is at least 50% of the quality of the final service, right? It doesn't surprise me that even the same vendor and the same solution produces patchy results, because that's always been the case.
Yeah, and another thread really is not so much from the travel seller research, but just from generally observing the market, is that we've now had a version of NDC, specifically version 21.3, that has supposedly addressed most of the big issues with previous iterations. It's been available for 4 years, and yet still maybe a quarter of the airline implementations out there are using it. What incentives or what persuasion could we use to get airlines at least up to that common standard that does now seem to be pretty stable?
And my impression is that a lot of new airlines that are implementing will use that standard. If you're an airline that started down this path 5 to 10 years ago, and you've got quite a lot of transactions already on 17 or 18 versions, the two main ones, it's not the flick of a switch to change. You need to get your vendor to upgrade. You need to get the third parties that are connected to upgrade. So it's going to take a little bit of time, I think, for those that have an existing solution out there.
I think also the whole issue of these standards and versions is a little bit murky, in the sense of an airline may be using a solution that is certified to 23 dot whatever, but that doesn't mean that all the features are working completely. And equally, they may be on an older version and have implemented some additional stuff that enables servicing, which is not actually included in that standard, but they're only certified to version 18. So what am I, the airline, delivering in terms of functionality versus what is my vendor's solution certified as? Those two things aren't always the same. And again, there's more patchiness there.
Yeah, I think that is a really important point, because, one of the things that I do when looking at our reporting on this market is keep an eye on the IATA index, the AIR, Airline Retailer Maturity. It changed its name a couple of years ago, didn't it? I'm not convinced, and I think this goes to what you were saying, Bert, that index always reflects the reality in the market of the airlines that have actually implemented the standards.
And this is why we always procure for capability. I mean, the advice that we give to everyone is your contract, your RFP, has got to have lists of business capabilities. Yes, you've got to have language that says you'll be compliant with standards. Yes, you've got to have all of those things. But at the end of the day, the thing that's going to put the rubber on the road is the actual capabilities that you can deliver. We also avoid having mention of vendor product names in contracts. We're not buying a product, or we're not buying a brand or a logo. We're buying a set of capabilities and services that are going to be delivered over a period of time. And that's where the contract needs to be strong. Yeah. Of course, we'll have language in there that says you'll remain compliant with this standard or that standard. But as we've seen, the standards themselves aren't enough to ensure consistency of capability. So that's I think the big warning for everybody is obviously check for compliance with standards, but that is not the thing that will save you in the end. It is rigorous capability.
And that's actually a really good segue into one of the other things I was going to bring up with you, which is the IATA document that they published a couple of weeks ago, procurement considerations for modern airline retailing. I'm sure that's not the exact title, I'm paraphrasing. My impression of that document is firstly, it is a very useful document, and certainly for airline managers who've not started to think about these issues yet, I think it's very valuable, and they should absolutely download it and read it.
Yeah, lots of good advice in there.
I am a bit concerned that it doesn't quite cover all the considerations around putting requests for proposals into the market and contracting for these services. And it's exactly the point that you were just mentioning, Bert. The IATA document does talk a lot about collaboration between airlines and vendors, asking open questions and getting into conversations about future directions and so on, which is all great and absolutely must be done. But when you want to sign a contract, you want to know what that contract is going to deliver. And that's where I think the IATA document is not there yet.
Yeah, exploration and open conversation is absolutely vital, and we've always encouraged that. However, it is a very difficult thing to turn into a contract at the end. You know, that PowerPoint that you saw 6 months ago on slide 15 that said X, where's that in the contract, right? So, you know, I think the IATA document is very logical. It's well structured. There's a lot of good advice. But as you say, and it is light in some areas, and open exploration is obviously an important process, particularly when you want to understand the vendor's future vision and roadmap and all of that kind of thing. But you know, there's a degree of rigor. There's some focus on real practicalities like delivery, transition, migration, all of those kinds of things, which those are the things that will trip you up first, i.e. long before you get to any future vision. If the implementation falls over, that's the thing that people will get fired for, not the future vision.
I suppose we've got a reasonable amount of experience. I mean, we've got a huge amount of experience of procuring passenger services systems.
More than anyone else, I like to say.
Absolutely more than anyone else. But we're only beginning to see how the procurement of modern retailing systems is going to pan out.
Yep.
And, you know, I can immediately think of 3 examples of airlines that have now contracted for a modern airline retailing system from Amadeus, specifically Finnair, Saudia and British Airways. And sadly, we weren't involved in any of those procurement decisions. So we are certainly looking forward to working with some of our airline customers, as we already have, and we can't talk about them because of NDAs and stuff, but we are already doing this.
You have to bear in mind that the area that we tend to specialize is in RFP, and very often, you know, in all those cases, the provider was the incumbent. So there wasn't necessarily, you know, we don't know one way or the other, but there wasn't necessarily a big process here. This was an extension of an existing set of services, which many airlines may feel is the most comfortable route. You know, is it, if I'm going to have to transition from offer an order from legacy technology to offer an order, it's easier to do that in the arms of an incumbent provider than have to do a complete migration at the same time. All the airlines who are looking at this at the moment are going to be looking at what their incumbent vendors have to offer, what the roadmap looks like there, as part of the decision about what they do next.
And I guess some of the airlines that we are working with are considering both. In many cases, they are running an RFP process, and their incumbent is absolutely part of that process. And
yes.
You know, is a strong contender, but they're also interested in hearing from other vendors as well to see what the options are available.
That's the other side of that argument, is that this is such an important transition that you must go and survey the market. Even if you think the incumbent provider is offering you something of almost dreamlike in its simplicity and transition, you must go and survey the market, and you mustn't make this decision about your future without really looking at what else is on offer.
And in terms of what else is on offer, the 3 confirmed commitments to moving to offer, order, settle, deliver are all with Amadeus. Is it inevitable that Amadeus will come to dominate that market in the way they do PSS today?
That's a very difficult thing to say. No, I don't think it's inevitable. I think, if we've got a very dominant player at the moment in legacy systems who are, probably look best positioned to capitalize on that current market dominance, i.e. it is Amadeus's ball to drop at this point. But, there are some very strong challengers, and there are airlines in the market who are very wary of exactly the dominance that we're talking about. And these things can change very quickly, and I'm sure Amadeus are aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the thrusts of discussions at IATA about the introduction of new technologies is that it will open the door for vendors who have not traditionally been suppliers to the airline industry to come in and take part of the market. Do we think that's realistic?
It's going to be a very narrow doorway, but yes, the door will be opened, because I think once you accept that you're going to have to take the drains up on stuff that's been bedded down, old plumbing, then that is going to ask some wider questions. And as I said, there are lots of carriers out there who are wary of the fact that we have a sort of oligarchy in the current provision, certainly of airline commercial technologies, and would like to see new players come in. And I think the market as a whole benefits from having new entrants. It attracts investment, it attracts innovation, all of that kind of thing. However, I stand by my comment. It is a narrow doorway because, as we've discussed in many previous podcasts, transition means that you've got to keep one foot in the past for a certain amount of time, which means any innovative new vendor coming in needs to find some way of bridging back into the past in order to maintain backward compatibility, connectivity with legacy partners, and so on. So there will be some opportunity for new vendors coming in. Obviously things like standards, simplification, all of these things lower the barriers to entry. But I wouldn't overestimate the size of the opportunity or underestimate the cost of going after it.
Maybe it's a modular opportunity rather than a full opportunity although that's also complicated.
It is. That is also complicated, and to be honest, the modularity opportunity has always been there. There's always been the opportunity to bolt exciting bits of new tech onto legacy systems, and it's always been about the contractual freedom to do that, and then the commercial viability of doing it, so that you're not taxed by the costs of your existing infrastructure when you put in new solutions. So that, I don't think, is necessarily going to change significantly. New and better standards may improve the opportunities for modularity. So yes, that doorway will get a little bit wider as well. But again, I don't want to sort of describe it as the doors being flung wide on this market. It's still, and I think will be, a very difficult market to get into.
I have sometimes wondered whether there's any scope for the very large general software companies, and I'm sure we could all name one or two of them, who are interested in this market. Is there scope for them to partner or even acquire some of the existing smaller companies in the field? And
of course,
and I'm very deliberately not naming names, but I can think of one or two one or two combinations that might be very interesting.
I mean, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So the big, powerful vendors who have the wherewithal to move mountains, and it is a mountain moving exercise. On the one hand, absolutely, they have the capability to do this. They could do it by acquisition. They could just do it by investing. The problem there is that these are the kinds of organizations who don't get out of bed for less than $10 billion or whatever. I mean, they're looking for large returns on that investment. And very often they're looking for the returns to start fairly quickly. And so actually that is the barrier for them. It's not capability, it's not knowledge, it's not the inability to acquire existing technologies. It's the willingness to invest ahead of the curve and to view the airline market as a really big future opportunity, which today not many of them do, certainly if you judge them by their actions rather than their words.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of the value of the market, if you compare it to things like banking or retail or government, the airline market is really quite small.
And we know that the airline industry's spend on IT as a percentage of revenue is relatively low compared to those other sectors and all of those things. And for that reason, if you look at the way that a lot of these big technical organizations organize themselves, airlines are part of travel and transportation, which in itself may be part of travel, transportation and hospitality. We're a subset of a subset of a subset. They don't even see the airlines as a vertical in their own right, because the money they don't see the money being there.
So for the foreseeable future, at least, we certainly think that the traditional suppliers to our industry will still have an important part to play, and they're not going to be swept away by sort of 800-pound gorillas coming in from outside.
It's a very difficult thing to call one way or the other, because as I've said, there is no barrier other than willingness. And so here's the problem, is that the 800-pound gorilla looks unlikely to move, but could at a moment's notice, in the blink of an eye, just as a matter of policy, one of these big vendors could suddenly decide they're going to make a move, because there is really no barrier other than willingness for them.
And that's a really interesting point at which to start to wrap this up. It's been a fascinating conversation, as always. Some of the material we've been talking about will feature in our latest quarterly OOSD report, which should be published shortly, depending on when you're listening to this, of course. All of the issues will be top of mind and subject to all sorts of interesting discussion at the T2RL Engage conference in September in London. So if you haven't already made your plans to attend that, I absolutely urge you to do so. And I will look forward to seeing as many of our listeners there as possible. So for now, I'd like to thank my colleagues Ian Luck and Bert Craven, and I'd like to sign off and say we look forward to the next time on T2RL Talks.
Thanks, Ian.